Since the Me Too movement exploded 2 years ago, 13 states in the United States have passed laws limiting the use of non-disclosure agreements that keep victims of workplace harassment from speaking out. 17 states have banned employers from asking job applicants about their past salary history, which perpetuates pay inequality. And 8 states in the District of Columbia have passed improvements to workplace culture, like requiring employers to provide paid leave or sick leave. Yes, I stand here as an American citizen and say, yes, the United States remains the only industrialized country in the world without a national policy providing paid family leave or even paid sick leave for our workers. We obviously have a lot of work to do. And just last month, several of us attended this signing ceremony with Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York, when New York passed and he signed into law the Time's Up safety agenda to protect women against violence against women. And we've also worked with companies to make their policies better, even when they misstep. So world-class athletes earlier this year, sponsored by Nike, came forward with stories about how they were discriminated against as pregnant or parenting athletes when Nike told them to drop. They were either dropped by Nike or their contracts were frozen. Time's Up spoke out alongside world-class athletes like Alicia Montano, Phoebe Wright, Kara Goucher, and we also communicated directly with Nike. And in August, I'm proud to say Nike announced it would no longer reduce pay or contracts for their pregnant or parenting athletes. Thank you. Now, the start of our organization began with supporting the victims of sexual harassment, and our goal is to eliminate sexual harassment. But we also know that sexual harassment is a symptom. It's a symptom that happens when our workplaces are fundamentally unequal and unfair. And so that our goal, our real goal in the real answer to sexual harassment is to work holistically on the many, many fronts it will take to achieve and build workplaces that are truly diverse and inclusive, up and down the wage scale, and that are places that are safe, respectful, fair, and equitable for all workers, and where everyone will have the ability to reach their full potential. A recent report by McKinsey estimates that if women played an equal role in labor markets to men, then global GDP in the next 5 years could increase by $28 trillion. That's more than the entire economies of Germany, Japan, and the UK combined. In the US, women are now 41% of the breadwinners of the heads of households. And women's purchases constitute 71% of consumer spending. And yet, even still, we continue to pay women unequally. In the US, our average wage gap is 80 cents on the dollar. An average woman makes 80 cents for every dollar that a man earns. But as you can see here, the numbers get worse when you look across race. And Latina women earn as little as 54 cents. We are about to have what was known as Latina Equal Pay Day, which is the days of the year, all the way into November, that Latina women have to work to earn the same salary that a man earned last year. And don't take my word for it. A report on economic growth issued by the Council on Foreign Relations last year highlighted an International Monetary Fund study showing that gender inequality is strongly associated with income inequality between the upper and lower income brackets. Now, this makes sense because, as the IMF noted, gender inequality is exacerbated at the lower ends of the economic ladder because women are less educated, they're more likely to work in the informal sector. And so closing the gender gap in the economy can shrink the disparity between rich and poor within countries and between developing and developed countries. Now, all of these factors are exacerbated by the fact that the vast majority of unpaid labor in our societies are performed by women. This is caring for our children, caring for our parents, building our communities. That burden is shouldered and uncompensated by women who do 75% of the uncompensated labor. And this is the labor that is subsidizing, but is not recognized by our economies. The undervaluation and the exclusion of women and girls from our efforts to grow economies is perhaps best seen in our failure to educate women and girls around the world. And this is something I saw close up when we launched Let Girls Learn, our effort that Mrs. Obama had in the White House to support the education of adolescent girls around the world. And it's work that she and I are continuing through the Obama Foundation with the creation of the Girls' Opportunity Alliance. Right now, although we have achieved relative parity in education between boys and girls at the primary school level, there still remain 98 million adolescent girls around the world who are out of school. And yet the economic case for including these girls and educating them is compelling. Countries that fail to educate their girls at the same level as boys can lose up to $1 billion a year. And if every girl was educated through high school, her lifetime earnings for all women could increase by anywhere from 15 to 30 trillion. And when women are able to reach their full potential, the GDPs of entire countries grows, the health of their communities improves, and actually the State Departments of both parties and the World Bank say that international peace and security will increase. And yet the barriers for these girls going to school are enormous. The economic barriers of the cost of school fees, books, uniforms, the absence of girls from paid labor for the family. There's the safety issues of violence on the way to school, violence at school, violence, as in the case of Malala Yousafzai in Pakistan and the girls in Chibok, Nigeria, of just simply being in school. The cultural issues of child marriage, female genital mutilation, the exclusion of girls on days when they're menstruating. Now, I believe there is a through line from these barriers to the barriers we see in workplaces that cause sexual harassment to remain prevalent and hidden for so long. These are the mechanisms by which women and girls are systematically excluded from the skills, the knowledge, and the institutions that would enable them to gain education, power, and economic success. For example, according to the World Bank, 90% of the world's 173 economies have at least one policy on the books that limits women's economic participation. So even when women get the education to enable them to join law firms, to be in corporations, to join the entertainment industry, they may still find that their pathway to success is blocked by pay inequality, the lack of paid leave, unequal promotion opportunities, and as we have seen documented in the last 2 years, sexual harassment. And what has made attacking these barriers so difficult is the insidious ways that retaliation, fear, the loss of job or the opportunity to pursue a career, or the age-old vilification and failure to believe survivors who speak out have kept hidden the dimensions of how toxic our workplaces are. The United States Economic Employment Opportunity Commission did a survey, and they tell us that 85% of women report experiencing sexual harassment at some point in their career. And yet, 3 out of 4 victims of sexual harassment never report. And I suspect the reason why they don't is because of the third statistic on the slide, which is that of the people who do report, 3 out of 4 say that they have been retaliated against. Which explains why we have really not been able to deal with sexual harassment, because you really cannot solve a problem that you cannot see. Now, the dimensions of this problem in our workplace are now starting to come into view, and I have to say it is thanks to the bravery and courage of so many women and men who are speaking out now about their experiences. And I want to acknowledge, for those of you now here in the audience who are journalists, and to Thomson Reuters, it is due to the relentless reporting and keeping an eye on this issue that many of the journalists and reporters in this room and around the world have continued to do. So I want to thank you on behalf of the women and men in workplaces around the world. So now, as we see the scope and the challenge before us, what are we going to do? Well, for companies, it means we have to stop looking at the issues as just human resources issues or labor costs to be contained. The ability to attract and retain and promote the best talent in the world are assets. These are assets. These are the assets that are going to help a company succeed. Management needs to be judged on the quality of the workplace culture the same way they are judged on their profit and loss statements. Because indeed, their success in having a workplace culture that supports their workers, attracts and retains the best talent, is the difference between profit and loss in the future. For policymakers, it means looking at those laws in 90% of our world economies that are holding women back. That's like the absence of paid leave in the United States. It's like looking at the 1/3 of the world's countries that have no protections against sexual harassment on their law books, and looking at the 24 countries that have 0 legal protections against gender-based discrimination at work. But the tide is changing already globally, and I'm happy to say that since the Me Too movement took off, voters have fought to pass laws combating sexual harassment in France, China, Morocco, and right here in the UK. And for you, for those of us here at the Trust Conference in the next days, as you consider what it will take to build more inclusive economies, place attacking gender inequality at the core of your consideration of this issue. Leaders who ignore gender equality when they are building fairer economies do so at their own peril. I would submit that any effort to address global economic unfairness that does not attack gender inequality in all its dimensions is doomed to failure. We simply cannot leave half of the world's population out of these solutions. Now, this is going to take substantial effort and sustained effort. It will not be solved in a couple of years. Gender discrimination runs deep. I often say that gender discrimination transcends time, race, geography, religion, socioeconomic status. It has been with us for millennia. It is biblical in its proportions. It is, in fact, literally in the Bible. But this is worth doing. It is worth doing in order to achieve economic equality. It is worth doing for our sons and our daughters and for our grandchildren. And it's worth doing for this young woman. This is a young woman I met in Liberia when Mrs. Obama traveled there for Let Girls Learn. She was at a girls' leadership camp sponsored by the Peace Corps. She told me she gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning, every morning, to get to school, do her chores before she goes to school. She goes home, she works late into the night to complete those chores, then do her homework, then go to bed, then get up and do it all over again. But she said to me, it's worth it because she wants to become either a teacher or a doctor, something, some profession that will help her community. And so she's making that effort. And here's what we need to do as adults. We need to build workplaces that are worthy of her effort, her sacrifice, and her talent. And that is the job before us. It's to build those workplaces for young women like her, for women like Malin DeVoe, for women and men who are struggling to feed their families that deserve to do it in workplaces that are safe, fair, dignified, and respectful for all of them. And if we do that, we will build those fuller, fair, and inclusive economies for all of us. Thank you very much.